Are you ready to take control of your physical, emotional, spiritual, professional, and financial health? Are you ready to experience great success in your life? Each week, join Dr. Diane A. Thompson and her guests for tools and strategies to help you take control of your health and inspire you to live your best life. Now here is your host, Dr. Diane A. Thompson.
Well, hello and welcome to Health Talk with Dr. Diane, MD. This is a show designed to inform and inspire you to a healthier lifestyle. I am your host, Diane A. Thompson, MD, and as always, it is my pleasure spending time with you on this broadcast with a goal that perhaps you will learn something new that will improve your health and your life. I would like to remind you that the information contained in this broadcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended for diagnosis or treatment. Please consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health. Now, we've all had situations where people have done us wrong. This includes our spouses, parents, friends, or even strangers. And on many levels, we know that forgiving them is one of the best things we can do for ourselves. Yet it seems to be one of the most difficult things to do. My guest today will help us learn how to forgive for good. Dr. Fred Luskin has a Ph.D. in counseling and health psychology from Stanford University. He is currently the co-founder and director of the Stanford University Forgiveness Project. He is also the author of actually my favorite book on the subject of forgiveness, which is Forgive for Good, a proven prescription for health and happiness. Dr. Luskin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, you've spent a lot of time studying the subject of forgiveness. I know what caused me to be interested in forgiveness. I'm one of those people who struggled with it, and so far I've gotten some really good strategies. But what got you interested in the topic?
I was actually badly hurt by a friend of mine quite a while ago, and he, from my point of view, just abandoned our relationship for no reason that I could understand, and I was just miserable. And so after a couple of years of that, my wife kind of nudged me and said, "Hey, Fred, get it together." And the only way that I could get it together was by forgiving him. And it was not something that I necessarily wanted to do or even knew how to do or had even considered before, being nudged like that. But once I did it, it just made my life bearable. And so that was the first impetus. The second was my doctoral dissertation. I had to figure out something to do as a dissertation study, so I wanted to make it something useful. So I figured if forgiveness was really challenging for me, and I didn't know what the heck to do, it was probably challenging for other people, so I did an actual experiment on how to train forgiveness as my dissertation.
Wow, and with this experiment, what so far do we know in terms of the science of forgiveness? What does that say about forgiveness?
Well, the most prevalent finding from forgiveness science is two things. One, that you can teach people to do this, that it's not something esoteric or weird or just religious, that it's a human quality that can be developed. And secondly, that when you practice it, it appears to have some positive physical and mental health benefits.
Now, you say it's a human quality, but I've noticed that even around me, there's some people where it just seems almost second nature, and then there are others of us where it's really a struggle. So what do you think it is, why some people are able to do it so much easier than others?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's like asking why are some people nice human beings and others not so nice. Some of the qualities that appear to reduce the capacity to forgive, one of them is narcissism. Like if you believe you're the center of the universe, then it's a lot harder to let go of stuff. People who blame a lot, like it's everybody else's fault but theirs, those people who have a harder time forgiving. One of the things that predisposes people to forgive, it appears, is some kind of sincere religious or spiritual affiliation, like they actually believe that they have some kind of responsibility to either their path or the God, so to speak. And it you just get the sense that there's people who go through this life more easily than other people, that they're just not racking up complaints and they're not keeping negative score, and they just go through it easier. And those people appear to forgive more easily, and I can't tell you what causes that.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that causes many of us to struggle so much is we often confuse what forgiveness is with what it's not. Can you expand upon that a little bit? What is forgiveness and what is it not?
Yeah, you just picked up something that's at the heart of actually what is taught about forgiveness. That one of the things that does stop so many people from forgiving is that they really don't know what it is, and they're confused about it, and they think it means that, if I forgive somebody, I never can be, frustrated or angry again. What forgiveness is a sense that, life happened, it was painful, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault after a while, and I have to figure out how to live a successful life, including what happened to me. So it's a kind of making peace with life's difficulties. What it's not is necessarily, you don't have to reconcile or, jump back in and tell the person who was harmful to you that you love them, and it has nothing to do with whether you take somebody to court. Like, you can forgive them and still, take them to court and say, hey, you owe me. And it has nothing necessarily to do with a sense of that you've forgotten what happens. It's just that you remember what happened without, saying that person's or that pain is responsible for how my life goes now. Like, you've let go of that.
And I always find that a lot easier to say than actually do when someone will say you let that go. But what happens whenever you do think of the thing, the hurt happens again. Like, how does one begin? Because I think that's a part of why a lot of people have trouble with this. They will want to forgive, but when they think of whatever the hurt was and it causes pain all over again, how do you begin to release that?
Well, I mean, that's taking a kind of passive sense of what it is that causes pain, and in a more active or truthful role, it's not just the hurt comes back, but it comes back with cognitions that say this is terrible, or that's a lousy human being, or this shouldn't have happened to me, or that's unfair. So there's usually a charge to how it comes back, and that charge is what makes us unhappy. So if the image came back or the remembrance came back and we just said, okay, there's some pain, I'm going to watch it for a minute and then it'll go away, or boy, I'm going to use this pain to remember how much pain other people are in, so I'm not going to, I'm going to develop compassion. Then there's nothing to forgive. There's just, a memory with some useful way of dealing with it. What happens if we don't have a useful way of dealing with it, or we continue our habitual negativity, then the pain comes back and we have blame and outrage again. And so we're creating that. It's not the experience. We're creating that in the moment that it returns. And so that's what has to be worked on to help people forgive.
And one of the things you also mentioned in your book, the book, by the way, is called Forgive for Good, A Proven Prescription for Health and Happiness. You talk about taking things too personally. How does that relate to our ability to forgive?
Well, whatever, like, let's say somebody has a husband who lied and cheated on them. For a while, you have to take it personally. It's like you have to deal with the horror of it and the pain and the loss. So it's your husband who lied to you or me. But after a while, it's just got to be, well, this is what happens. People cheat and lie. I mean, people mistreat each other. It happens all over the place. It's like, this is just part of life. And so going from that personal, it's all about me, to this is what life is like, that's getting out of the personal. When people stay stuck, it's because they stay stuck in the personal, that it's just about what happened to me. They don't ever develop a wider lens. And so the stuckness is from never having developed that wider lens.
Is that a part of the grievance story that you talked about?
The grievance story emerges from that. It's an outgrowth of that. Like, we tell a story, which I'm just calling a grievance story, to lock in place the problem from a certain perspective. So if you've had a bad wife and, it's 5 years later, but you can still talk about the bad wife, I don't know, I'm just making this stuff up, but you can still talk about the bad wife in a certain way that locks her into who she was 5 years ago. Like, she lied, she cheated, but that's not necessarily who she is now. So a grievance story is a way of talking about something or thinking about something in a way that makes it seem solid and true when it was just a period in time.
Very interesting. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back after a few words from our sponsors. And when we return, we will talk more about the topic of forgiveness, but we're going to look at some of the strategies that may help us to forgive for good.
You're listening to Health Talk with Dr. Diane, MD, sponsored by FMG Radio. Please visit Dr. Diane and browse her past shows and guest bios at fmgradio.com/Dr. Diane, MD. That's DRDIANE, MD.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you are listening to Health Talk, and my guest today is Dr. Fred Luskin. He is the co-founder and director of the Stanford University Forgiveness Project, and he's the author of the book, Forgive for Good, a proven prescription for health and happiness. And Dr. Luskin, one of the things, and we hear this all the time, that forgiveness is good for our health. In fact, in your book you mentioned that holding a grudge is hazardous to our health. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between forgiveness and health?
In its most simple terms, non-forgiveness or remembering something with a hostile or an anxious or a resentful edge pours lots of stress chemicals into the body. I mean, that's really what happens. So if I remember, like, how bad my mother was at this moment, I'm going to remember it with adrenaline and cortisol and all sorts of other, harmful chemicals. And those, over time, wear away vulnerable parts of our body. I mean, it's just the stress response is triggered every time we remember somebody that hurt us that we haven't come to peace with. I mean, that's just what it is. We haven't come to peace with something, so it gets remembered as a threat. And so when that is habitual, it causes damage. And usually the way stress damages things is the most vulnerable organ or the most vulnerable part of the body after a while starts to break down. So for some people it could be musculoskeletal, for some it could be cardiovascular, for some it could be either immune function, whatever it is. But the stress response affects almost the whole body. When you forgive, you cut out that stress, but if you add to that some modest form of beneficence or goodwill, then you've added positive chemicals to the mix, not just gotten rid of negative chemicals, And that can be very, very powerful.
And as you mentioned, I think on many levels we do know that this is good for us to do, but what is it that you think that causes us to have such challenge with forgiving? Because we know it's best for our health to do this, but why do we struggle with this so much?
People don't like to be humbled. And often when we've been hurt, we've been humbled, like somebody put one over on us or took advantage of us. And we don't like that. The second and probably more powerful aspect of it is we hate being reminded of how vulnerable we are in this world. We just hate it. And so forgiveness is a significant reminder that there's lots of stuff that happens that can be even painful that we have no control over. And again, that's one of those things that we just hate to acknowledge. Then, both forgiveness and unforgiveness are natural. Like they're both normal parts of life. There are times when you absolutely want to be forgiving, and there are times when you don't. And so they're both built into us. We just have to figure out, and this is challenging, to figure out when's the moment to keep our guard up and when's the moment to let it go. And that takes effort. And it's often easier to just do the easy thing, which is to blame somebody or make them a terrible person and then leave it at that.
Now, one of the things that you talk about in your book is the stages of becoming a forgiving person. I wonder if you could share with us some techniques or strategies for people who are really struggling with forgiving. What are some of the things we can start to do right now to get ourselves to a place where we're more of a forgiving person?
Well, the first and most important is to stop complaining about what happened to you. That if some time has passed and you've told 10 people what an SOB that this person was, it is probably in your best interest to not do that again. And that is really challenging, but if there was one piece of advice, it would be put a sock in your mouth the next time you're tempted to bitch about what somebody did to you. Now, that sounds kind of crude, but what it's actually saying is you're creating different pathways. Like you're stopping this pathway of negativity and you're saying, I'm going to try something else, and then your brain gets a chance to practice different things. But it's the stopping of the habitual response of this is awful and I need to tell everybody about it. That frees up the capacity to do something else. Now, another thing that we can do, which is really helpful, is to, when we feel upset, practice stress management qualities that get rid of that upset. And that's the other thing that people don't tend to do as much, which is, like when you're upset, instead of just staying stuck in being upset, what you want to do is breathe into your belly and relax it, or think of something wonderful, or take a brief walk, or just look out at the trees. Do something so that you get the adrenaline out of your system. And that's very powerful. And the third simple technique that I teach, and you referred to it a little before as the Grievance Story, is you have to find a different story to tell about what happened. You have to come up with a story where it's not poor you. That there just has to be a story which is truthful, but it's not just, oh my God, this is so terrible, why did it happen to me, blah, 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 blah. Because that story is actually, after a while, which keeps us trapped. Not what happened, but the way we talk about it. And so much of our forgiveness education is about training people in how to do these things. Some training in, okay, stop complaining, now what? Make sure the next 10 times you remember how terrible your grandmother was. Instead of just being stuck there, take a few deep breaths, think about it, quiet down, and do so without adrenaline. Those are those are qualities, and then longer term, really come up with a different story, really come up with something that you can talk about which doesn't keep you trapped as a victim.
Those are really, really great advice. I mentioned earlier that your book is my favorite on the subject of forgiveness, and I wasn't kidding. I actually picked up this book some time ago when I realized I was having trouble forgiving someone, and the thing that helped me most was to stop complaining. There were a couple of people who would just encourage that complaining, and it was such a dysfunctional thing. And when I stepped away from that was one of the best things I could have done, because I did not get to continue partaking in this story and, complaining and having them supporting my complaints. And it was just a great thing to step away from that. So I think these are really, really great advice. You mentioned a little bit about the training that you do. Is this type of training available for people out there who are really looking for help in this area?
No, only in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been invited to do workshops and stuff in different part of the country, but that's on an episodic basis. But here, say, at the university, a few times a year I teach public classes on forgiveness. So, 40 people will show up and they'll take my class and they'll learn how to forgive. And I have taught it to undergraduate students here, but I don't, it's not available, nationally. That's not been something I've ever had the energy or the disposition to do.
Well, certainly, I'm sure for some people it may be a worthwhile trip, because this is really something that people struggle with. But of course, your book is there, and there's a lot of helpful information in there. So that's certainly one place for people to start. Now, I usually love to leave my listeners with a tip of the week. And so my question for you, we talk about learning to forgive someone. Often, though, we never really learn how to forgive ourselves. So what do you think is probably the most important, or the single most important step someone could take if they're having trouble forgiving themselves?
I would give you two simple strategies. Is one, be gentle on oneself, cultivate compassion towards oneself, because everybody screws up. Everybody. And there's no other way to be a human being, and there's no other way to learn but to make mistakes. So the first is, again, it's not that you minimize what you did, but you recognize it as something normal. And then the second piece, and this is, straight from the 12-step programs, whatever harm you have done, make amends. Making amends is so much more important than how you feel about something. When I come in and people tell me I feel terrible about what I did, I don't care. That has no interest to me how they feel about it. What matters to me is, did they do something to make it right? And that's the most important thing we can do about self-forgiveness, is whatever harm we have done, even if it's towards ourselves, it's what behaviors and actions and words can we do to make it right, to make it better, to pay it back, to pay it forward. I don't know, whatever it is, but that's where we want our energy to be. And that solves a lot of problems, is, just do right. So tell somebody you're sorry, or tell your kids you didn't, whatever it is, just do something. Being stuck in the feeling, to me, means almost nothing.
So do something about it. This is all such great advice. Dr. Luskin, thank you so much for being on the show. How can our listeners contact you or learn more about your book?
Learningtoforgive.com is my website.
So I encourage everyone to go to that website, and I seriously encourage you to really get this book. As I said before, forgiveness is one of the things I struggled with, and I think I picked up about 5 different books on the subject, and really this was one that resonated with me. I really learned so much, and it gave me concrete and really tangible skills that I could use, and I really saw the effect immediately. So I encourage people to pick up the book and check out Dr. Luskin's website. Thank you again for coming on the show, Dr. Luskin.
You're very welcome, Diane. Thank you for having me.
Okay, take care. I also want to thank you, the listeners, for listening in every week. I know you could be elsewhere, so I'm very grateful that you continue to come here each week to learn something new. And I know that you've learned something new. You've learned a new way to approach forgiveness, and I really hope that you put some of these strategies into practice. I mean, maybe this is the week you will make amends, or you will learn to forgive yourself or learn to forgive someone else. As always, I encourage you to take good care of yourself. Remember, your health is your wealth. So do something healthy this week. And please go to my Facebook page at facebook.com/Dr. Diane A. Thompson and let me know what you think. And as always, I encourage you to have a fabulous week and stay healthy. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to Health Talk with Dr. Diane, MD. For show replays and full guest bios, please be sure to visit fmgradio.com/Dr. Diane, MD. That's DRDIANE, MD.